and then get started. Enjoy the music. Let us know in the chat where you're calling in from. Feel free to go ahead and update your profile as well. Your icon is in the top right corner. You can add your LinkedIn profile, you can add your pronouns, you can add your title, really whatever you want us to know, but that'll make it a lot easier if anyone's ever hovering over your name in the audience bar to connect with you, learn more about you. Okay, might as well turn the music off. I don't know if there's anyone else who's going to be joining today. It's all good, but we might as well dive in because I'm really excited about this discussion. I think it's going to be very juicy. I really appreciate everything that we're going to be talking about. I think it's good stuff. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today during your lunchtime. This is TechTO Insider HustleStruggz. This month we're going to be talking about getting tips from a startup lawyer. You know, a lot of us are looking at starting our own venture or perhaps in the process of doing so. Perhaps we have an MVP, perhaps we're going for seed series A, who knows? But it never hurts to make friends with a lawyer and get their 2 cents on how you should be going about navigating certain challenges. So as Alex mentioned, introduce yourself in the chat. If you have questions that you want us to include in the discussion, please feel free to put them there. And at the end of the discussion, we're also going to have an open Q&A where we'll turn on a button and you can actually join the stage if you want to. So I'm going to take a quick step back and talk about, what we're doing here. So Insider HustleStruggz is a monthly virtual event series, fireside forum, just kind of a chit chat. For myself, the Insiders manager at TechTO, my name is Laura, for anyone who's meeting me for the first time, to chat with one of our Insider members about, certain challenges that come along with early stage entrepreneurship. And the idea is to just kind of relate with one another and also, help learn how to navigate these challenges from different perspectives, because you're likely to encounter a lot of them, so it's good to learn. It's kind of peer to peer learning. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking or getting some tips from a startup lawyer. And in just a moment, I'm going to invite Daniel Rizzi to the stage. So to give a little bit of information about Daniel Rizzi, if you haven't seen him in our Insider Slack, because he's very active there, he's wonderful at providing advice and being a great connection for insiders who are signing up. But at the same time, separately, Daniel has worked at Canada's largest tech and IP firm before going off and starting his own legal practice. He helps founders start their companies, grow them, and fundraise capital. He also learned how to code in 2020 and is co-founder of a tech startup called WeWatch, which is launching its MVP this month. So I'm sure that he is, taking a lot of his own advice these days as he starts up WeWatch, which is really, really awesome. But I'd love to hear his perspectives. So everyone, give a round of applause as I invite Dan Rizzi to join me on stage here.
How's it going, Laura?
Hey, Dan.
How's it going?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on. And great intro. Again, I'm launching the MVP this month, so it's a pretty busy time, but happy to help.
Do you want to tell us about what that is, just for a quick minute before we dive into the discussion? Because I'm curious.
Sure. Okay. So I was just at Collision 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I've said this pitch 1,000 times, but I can run through it really quickly now. So the app's called WeWatch, and let's say you get robbed or you get into a car accident, you can hop on the app, let it know what happened, and from there it'll send a ping to all the phones in the area, and they'll get a push notification. It's by default anonymous, so they can report if they saw anything. Maybe their car's dash cam caught a video, maybe their home security system saw something. They can upload all that media to the app. It gets compiled into a report and it gets sent to you, the user, and you can do whatever you want to do with it. So take all that, go to the police, your insurance company, do nothing. And that's sort of the MVP we're launching.
Cool. We're excited about it. Hopefully you share it in the Sharing My Work channel when it's launched and when it's ready to have eyes on it. But thanks for sharing about that. And that's kind of a fun little side hustle. Considering what we're talking about here today. And I'm sure, as I mentioned, you're ready to take a lot of your own advice, but also receive others, because we're going to talk about second opinions. But let's start with covering some basics. So We're talking about early stage startups and that the kind of pre-seed seed round, level of founder and of venture. So what are the elements of a new company's basic legal infrastructure that founders should be thinking about, almost like Lego pieces? What needs to be part of that puzzle?
Sure. So I guess the first step is sort of the form of business it's going to take, whether it's an incorporation with Corporations Canada or the provincial governments, or a partnership between a few people. And I mean, the third as well as a sole practitioner. So just no formal structure, but generally that's not the right choice for a lot of people. And I mean, the difference between a corporation and a partnership kind of comes down to tax benefits. So if you have other streams of income or you have some very wealthy investors backing you from the beginning, maybe you'll do a partnership at first. But generally, most people will start with a corporation. And then from there, once you figure that out, you might have to talk to your accountant to sort of see what you're doing there. But once you have that going, then it's a matter of, okay, if I have multiple co-founders, how are we going to run this thing, right? Who has what responsibilities to do this and that? If someone's bringing in money, are they being compensated more with more equity? If people are bringing in more tech, if they're bringing in patents or trademarks or whatever other types of assets, maybe some warehouse space, maybe you're going to work out of their house and you guys are going to get free house space. So how is the company going to be run? How are you dividing up the spoils? Getting expectations set, and we sort of do that through a shareholders agreement. As well, there's some services out there that will let you incorporate yourself, but you also have to have a corporate minute book. So a lot of those $400 to get incorporated services, they don't give you a minute book, and the minute book is kind of like a ledger for all the corporate decision making stuff, which isn't a super big deal at the beginning. But if you start to do that first fundraising round, or maybe you're looking to sell the business at some point, every single investor is going to have their lawyer look through the company and look for this minute book. So it's going to be something you have to have at least later on down the line. So yeah, corporation, shareholder agreement, patents come a little bit later if you're sort of doing innovative technology. Trademarks, I like to tell people if $2,000 sounds a lot like a trademark, you're too early. So trademarks and patents come a little bit later. Yeah, and I think that's the basics. Essentially, get the company going, and then you have to decide how it's going to be run.
Okay. So obviously a few different moving pieces, probably, customized based on what it is that someone's building and how they're building it. What's your recommendation? Do founders need to dive in and start paying legal counsel from the beginning, or are there other ways that you recommend they seek advice along the way before they dive into actually paying for legal counsel?
Yeah, for sure. So there's the lawyer answer, and then there's the business answer. And I guess I forgot to say none of this is legal advice. So please speak to a lawyer. Every situation's different, and we're going to be talking generalities here. But the lawyer answer is you should talk to someone as soon as you can. And most people won't talk to you for free, and they'll want some type of compensation. The business answer I generally give people is I probably want people to wait until they start bringing in revenue, because yeah, you can do the shareholder agreement and figure out how things are sorted, but what's the point if you're not making money yet? There are exceptions. If somebody's putting in a large amount of money up front, then you probably want to get that done sooner rather than later, as well as like other types of technology, maybe patents. But generally, most companies, they start the company, they're building the software, there's no revenue yet. One person's building the software, the other person's trying to do marketing, get clients on board. So in that scenario, a lot of people can wait, but once you start making money, you should really at least start the conversation with a lawyer, because the worst thing that happens with companies is you're making $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 a month, and then somebody wants to leave, and you don't have any arrangements for people leaving or things like that. So now their share of the company is kind of up in the air, and you just can't kick them out really
Mhm.
if it's a 50-50 split there. And even if it's less, it's still complicated. So you'll have to come to an agreement among people to see, okay, this person wants to exit. They kind of have to voluntarily give up their share. And if they don't, you have a lot of issues. So definitely minimum, if you're making money, okay, now you have to kind of go talk to a lawyer.
Right, right. And of course it's like just good to have those kinds of conversations to understand what contingencies you need to have in place, because you never know exactly how long the road is going to be the way that it is right now. So in that case, how would you recommend a founder builds trust in advisory relationships, legal or otherwise? And when it comes to getting advice, because that's really what we want to talk about is, how does a founder go about building a network of advisors or people that they can go to for trusted wisdom? It's so in that case, how do you spot red flags when it comes to receiving advice, and how do you build that trust in a potential advisor, whether or not they come on with equity down the road or they're just kind of helping guide you along the pathway for now? But what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I guess I'll start with the green flag. I think the first green
Okay.
flag is just, are they adding value like right from the get-go, right? In that first conversation, are you guys brainstorming? Are they giving you their thoughts on your business and what you can do better? If you're not getting value and it's like, oh, the value comes after you pay or after a certain amount of time, or I'll introduce you to people, don't worry about it. And if it's not immediate, if they're not willing to make an introduction right up front, then I'd say that's a red flag. So if you're not getting any value before they want stuff from you, then that's a bad sign. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a very case by case situation, but in terms of getting good legal counsel, it's, does this person have time to talk to me? I think is the biggest thing, right? Or maybe with an investor, an advisor, 1 hour a month might be okay, but with your lawyer, at least up front, you're going to want to talk to them. You want to have an in-depth conversation. So I'd be looking for, does this person have time to talk to me, or am I just going to be handed off to potentially a junior associate that maybe hasn't been working for a year yet?
Mhm.
Something like that. So a lot of people, they go to these big firms and you get the senior partner, maybe does an intro 15 minutes with you, but then you have associates who are overworked dealing with all your stuff. So does this person have time to talk to me? Can they add value? Are they adding value? And the other thing as well is, are they asking for arrangements that aren't kind of like market standard?
Mhm.
So a big thing is vesting, share vesting. So if an advisor says, "Oh, absolutely no share vesting," I'd maybe see that as a bit of a red flag, just because, um, like you don't know if you're going to get value from this person, right? And what, they're just going to get a chunkier company for not really doing anything, and then they go, "Oh, like when you're successful, they want this big payout." I'd say share vesting is a great way to make sure you're getting the value before somebody has that definitive piece of your company. So when people want situations where it's not market, they say no to share vesting. Even with employees, if they don't like that 1 year cliff, 4 year vesting period, it's always a question of, well, if everyone else in the industry is okay with this, why aren't you? And if they don't have a
Mm.
really good reason, then definitely a red flag.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So that's like that kind of covers painting with a broad brush when we're talking about advisory relationships. You also want to kind of vary the opinions or the advice that you receive. So I want to talk about how important it is to seek second opinions during the early stages of a venture. And what would you consider to be a balanced set of opinions, I guess, for when early founders are seeking advice.
Yeah, for sure. So I think second opinions are huge. And the thing a founder always has to keep in mind is, you don't know everything, right? So in my startup, I have legal expertise, and I can determine if I'm talking to a lawyer if they know what they're talking about. But in terms of accounting, well, I'm not an accountant, right? So an accountant can tell you all this information. That sounds really good, but you don't have the skills to determine if this accounting information is correct or not. So you always have to keep that in mind, right? Just because someone sounds confident doesn't mean they actually know what they're talking about. So second opinions, I'd say three opinions are great, because if you talk to one person, you get one opinion. You talk to a second person, if it's the same, you're probably okay. But if you talk to the second person, you get a different answer. Then you have to talk to the third person, and then maybe you have two of the same answers and one that's different, or maybe you have three different answers, and then you have a real problem there. But
And
um,
also looking at it from like these folks or these people that you're getting second opinions from, like, are they have a varied level of experience, like they're not all from the same team, they haven't all worked together before. You want to make sure that there's some diversity in terms of your advice that you're receiving.
oh, for sure, yeah, because someone who's maybe worked at a startup where they had a mill in the bank right from the beginning is going to have different answers for you versus someone who bootstrapped for 5 years. And you also have to think about people's biases as well, right? So you're going to get advice from your venture capital people that you invest with, but they obviously have a bias, right? They want you to grow fast. They want to grow their investment quickly. They're more they're not as risk averse as potentially you are because you own the company, and they have a 5 to 10 year time horizon to exit the business. So yeah, it's just what's this person's bias, right? If you talk to a lawyer, well, the lawyer's bias is yeah, you got to do all this legal work, right? Because it's very important. But you talk to an accountant, and the accountant has a different bias, and different people have different biases. So just think about like what's this person's incentive, and is their advice lining up with their bias and what they get out of the situation? And a lot of the times you're going to find that this person isn't advocating against their own interest, and their advice fulfills their interest in your company.
Okay, got it. So let's talk a little bit about like documenting this like value exchange that we've been talking about, or this advisory relationship. You know, it's also very common, obviously, for founders to rely on like friends and family and personal connections. And so, can you talk about, as it relates to bias, as it relates to a few different, I guess, contextual situations, but when is it really important to formalize these relationships and to formalize the value exchange that is expected, and what that will end up looking like in an ideal world?
Right, for sure. So a lawyer would say you should have a lawyer draft every document and sort of put something comprehensive together. But I mean, like, documenting can be as simple as just write it down, just like briefly Word doc, maybe a paragraph or two, and get both people to sign, just so it's like there's some record of this is what we talked about. And if somebody's going to directly contradict whatever's in that Word doc, well, it's like this is what we talked about, this is what we said at the moment. So like let's say you have two co-founders, it could literally just be, I'm going to code, you're going to do marketing, and you'll be the CEO and you run most of the business, and I'm just going to do product. It could be as easy as
Mhm.
that. Or it could be, you put in some contingencies. So like, oh, if the business takes longer than 6 months to get going, I'm going to run out of money, so I'm going to have to exit, things like that. But it just get something down on paper, just so like people can see. If you're taking money from family, it can be as simple as like, okay, you're my dad, you're my mom, you gave me 25 grand, and I will write you a safe agreement in the future, or this will act like a safe agreement, and at the next fundraising round, you'll get the usual sort of package people get.
Right. So
And it can just,
it's not about letterhead. It's just about the document and having it signed, having it kind of be acknowledged by all of the parties who are involved.
yeah, just have something to point to, and listen, we wrote this down, we agreed to it. This is what it is. And if you're doing it yourself, you're obviously not going to cover every contingency because you don't necessarily have the training to do that. But if you're really against working with a lawyer, then just literally write things down, 2 or 3 paragraphs, each person signs. It'll save you a lot of headache later.
Got it. Got it. So let's kind of segue into, again, it's relationship building, but we'll talk a little bit more about, co-founders. Kind of also bringing in the idea of, personal relationships and how you start something up and how you move something forward. But, in the context regarding personal relationships and just networking in general, what are your tips for picking a co-founder that is a good long-term decision?
Sure. So I mean, this is one of the hardest decisions to make because um, either you know the person for a long time or you haven't really known them long at all. So one thing is you want to just have complementary skill sets. So if they can do everything you can do, then it's kind of, I mean, like, why do you need that second person there? Um, you want to make sure if you have money, they need to have time. So if you don't have a lot of time, you need someone with a lot of time. So there has to be a match in terms of the resources you guys can bring. Um, I also would want to say that you have to make sure they can have really hard discussions with you. So, if share vesting gets really awkward, like up front, that's probably a red flag because again, one, it's standard, right? So everybody's already doing this. But two, if we can't have hard decisions, If somebody says, oh, I can only do 5 hours a week in the business and you're doing 40 hours a week, then obviously, there's a difference in time. So maybe there's a difference in equity there.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you guys really can't sit down and hammer out the hard things up front, then in the future, when things actually get hard, when money's running out, or you have this investor decision to make, or you have to launch products soon, or you're gonna miss a contract, things will get a lot worse if you guys can't talk about that stuff. So I'd say, yeah, just try and have hard conversations up front just to see how it goes. And if there's problems coming up early on there, then you guys are probably not a good match.
Right. And it's another reason to, maybe don't choose your cousin, or don't choose someone that you have a long-term friendship with, without testing out how you function in difficult conversations, and making sure that, that if the relationship is what you care more about, then it's might not be the right match in the long-term perspective. But yeah, I think it's really fair to say commitment of time, and just kind of, having that balance out with the equity, and what the expectations are, is really, really wise. So let's talk a little bit about intellectual property now. What's the status quo for IP ownership at this point?
Yeah, I mean, so generally, if a company develops the IP while the business is going, then the IP is kind of owned by everyone depending on their share ownership. Um, so if you're the technical founder and you spent 60 hours a week building code, and then your co-founders doing other things haven't really contributed, um, you might be a little angry about this, right? Because you worked hard, you built something that potentially is the only part of the business that actually has value, and maybe that email list or whatever else, the Instagram presence the company has built isn't worth anything, at least early on, because it's still small. So technical people really want to think about this, right? Like if they're going to code 40 to 60 hours a week, um, what are the other people going to be doing? And if you guys fail or somebody leaves early on, what's going to be happening with that IP? So the default is just, if you own 50% of the company, you own 50% of the IP. And you don't even technically own it, it's in the corporation. So if the corporation gets sold, you're entitled to 50% of the proceeds generally.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, you can make arrangements where it says, okay, if the company fails before a certain point in time, I just take all the IP with me because I sort of made it. Or you could say, I take the IP, and if I ever sell it at a later time, maybe you get a percentage, something like that. So the default is great for everyone else other than the technical people. But yeah, that's how it would go down.
Okay. So I'm sure that there are a couple of special cases too. Let's say a technical co-founder is bringing in IP that's pre-owned, pre-applied, or, perhaps they have a patent involved. Can you talk a little bit about some ways to navigate that, to make sure that, if there's an end of the day, that everyone doesn't get screwed over, so to speak?
Sure. So this kind of comes back to documentation, right? So if you just bring the patent in and the company's been operating in a way that seems like, yeah, everybody assumes the company just fully owns the patent now, um, you're going to lose a large chunk of your ownership there because you didn't say, okay, I'm lending the patent to the company, or I'm giving the company a license to use the technology. And, there's terms to the license. So how many years? Is it exclusive? Is it just a commercial license? Is it non-commercial? So if you don't do any documentation and you bring in technology, you might be out of luck there, because if everybody's pretending that it's the company's property, including yourself, well, if something ever goes wrong, well, the court's going to be like, yeah, the company spent 2 or 3 years building on this technology. It seems like the company owned the technology. And when you say, oh, no, 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 but I brought it in, we had a verbal arrangement that, the company wouldn't own the technology. Well, then it's three or four other founders who are saying, "Oh, we didn't
Hmm.
talk about this, right? Like we wouldn't use the technology if we didn't have like permanent access to it." So, um, like you can do whatever type of arrangement you want as long as you document it, right? So
Right.
if you come in with the default, a lot of the times you're going to get results you don't expect.
Got it. Got it. So speaking about, I guess, documentation, and how these relationships are formalized, how these agreements are formalized, how can that, or even those agreements, like we're talking about, just jot it down, have a couple paragraphs, and sign them. How can, I guess, different types of agreements impact fundraising, when the time comes, and when you have, potential investors looking through the nitty gritty, what would you recommend in terms of like building up a legal infrastructure that puts you in a ready position for when you're going out to make that seed round or eventually that A round?
For sure. So you have to remember, if you think about fundraising in the future, it's at some point, at some day, whether it's maybe you're doing a seed round that's about a mil, or you're doing your Series A, your lead investor is going to go, okay, it's great. Here's the term sheet, sign on the dotted line, and now you need to go get a lawyer, because what's going to happen is the investor's lawyer is going to look through all your documentation, your company, everything, and look for problems. And if you've been doing everything yourself, like, I guarantee you, this lawyer billing $500 an hour for one of the big firms is going to find something you didn't do right, or something you missed. So at some point, you are going to have to formalize, regardless of what you're doing, unless you're never going to fundraise and you're going to have that sort of sustainable revenue and profit business. But I mean, the earlier the better, because there's so many things that can happen. Like, one of the main pitfalls people fall into is if you have a third party make your software, so you're outsourcing the development. If you don't have a contract that says, I own the software that you make for me, if you don't have that explicitly down, they actually own the software and they're giving you a license to use it. So when it comes fundraising time, the VCs are going to say, okay, buddy, I love the software, but you don't own it. So go to your developer and they need to sign this contract now. And of course, well, they're like, oh, you're raising a mil, you're raising 5 mil. Okay, well, give us, 100 grand, 500 grand, and then we'll sign the paperwork for you. So that's kind of the biggest pitfall. But if you
Hmm.
have multiple founders and maybe somebody left early on, well, investors are going to be like, okay, they left, you guys didn't document it, how much of the company they're going to get. And then you say, oh, they said, don't worry, just leave it. Like, we're not interested. Well, no, the investors is going to say, that's not good enough. We need them to sign something on paper. And then you go to them with that paper, say, hey, we're raising money, just sign this thing, you're done with the company. They're going to be like, oh, whoa, hold on, right? Maybe
Exactly.
there's some
Yeah.
money in it for them as well. So, um, yeah, I mean, you're going to have to do it at one point or another. It's better earlier than later. But yeah, like, there's going to be a lawyer that looks through your business and they're going to check to see if you did everything. And if there's certain problems that you didn't address, potentially the lawyer is going to be recommending to their investor that, hey, they really messed this up. They can't get the assignment of the software. There's some founder that's going to pop out of the woodworks in 3 or 4 years demanding a part of the company, and I don't recommend this. Or even you have weird agreements with people where somebody says, oh, I'll help you fundraise a mil and I'll take 15% of that $1 million for my help. Well, the investor is going to say, wait a minute. So if I give you a mil, I'm only going to give you $850,000. And then this random guy walks off with 150 grand of my money.
Hmm.
That wasn't a good business decision. I don't like that.
So it's just a
So
testament. It's a testament to seeking out second and third opinions early as you go into these, more formal, higher stakes relationships. As you grow and as you're, trying to figure out how you carve your path and start actually being able to work on the product, which is what a lot of founders are going to want to do. They're going to want to kind of get. This is not the fun part for a lot of people, and so it helps to be thinking about it early, but and just to have kind of your ducks in a row, so to speak. So, kind of to change direction a little bit, there's a lot of founders that are good, might be thinking about getting into an accelerator or an incubator program. So, from a legal perspective, can you talk about benefits and risks of building those kinds of relationships, or that having that kind of be a launch pad for a new founder?
sure, yeah. So I'm a big fan of those programs. I think there's a lot of value, because owning 100% of a company that's worth zero is worth $0. But then if you give 7% to Y Combinator and they give you 100 grand, now you own a percentage of a company that actually worth something. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely, if you don't really know anything about running a tech company, the accelerators are huge value, even if you're giving up, 5 to 10% of equity there without cash, and the cash helps. It's also, they do a lot of introductions to investors. And generally, accelerator programs will have a very standard agreement for the equity they're getting. So, every single company that goes through Y Combinator has probably signed a similar agreement. So, It's not super high risk. I would just say don't do like 5 or 6 accelerators, and each one you're giving away equity to, right? There might be room for 2 or 3, but founders run into the issue of, oh, I'm doing all this extracurricular stuff, and it's like, no, just build product, build products.
Mm,
You don't want to give away 20 to 30% of your company before you have anything built. And if
hmm.
you didn't really get value from the first 2 accelerators, what are you going to get from the third, fourth, and fifth? And yeah, so there's arguments for both sides, but it's more of don't get distracted by these things. And at the end of the day, like you have to ship your product and
Yeah.
ship your product, and then you'll actually get more use out of the accelerators because now you have real questions to ask them about. Oh, I'm doing marketing and I have an email list of 5,000 people, and there's like this one feature on HubSpot where I can sort of do it like this. And then they'll say, oh, yeah, I did that, but then this way's better. So the farther along in your business, the more advice really helps you from the business perspective. So I'd say they're great, but don't overdo it.
Got it. Got it. I mean, it's good advice too, especially when we're talking about really, really early stage founders and folks who are starting to figure out what the first couple of steps look like. So, speaking about building investor relationships, you know, what would you say are the top things that a founder needs to demonstrate or prove before fundraising more broadly? And that's talking about a community outside of incubators and accelerators, but building those
Mhm.
relationships, building that network. What is it that you think a VC is going to really, really care to see from an early stage startup?
Yeah, I mean, from the business perspective, it's just traction, traction, traction. If you have no traction, you're going to have a lot of problems, and unless you're a second or third founder with multi-million-dollar exits, you're probably not going to raise without traction. Yeah, you might get some angel investors if you're charismatic and you have a really cool idea, but at the end of the day, you want to get to traction as soon as you can. From the legal perspective, you want to have that formalization already there. So it looks really good if you have a data room set up, you have all the corporate documents there, you have your spreadsheets for your finances, you sort of have everything there ready to go. So when they go, okay, we're interested, let's do due diligence, you just send them a link, you go take a look, let me know what you think. And then you look like a business person. You look like you're serious. You're not messing around. And it's they feel safer of like, okay, well, if at least if they've taken care of the stuff that's like easy to do because you can just hire someone else to do it. One, they've shown delegation skills, but two, they're showing just like a level of business maturity. So
Yeah, it's
I'd say
almost like
traction and formalization.
turnkey. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
traction and formalization. So speaking on the formalization element, we're in an environment where there's so many different kinds of startups being, launched, and that includes software, that includes crypto, that includes Web3, and I can imagine that how to prepare and what kind of formalization is required for each of those contexts could be a little bit different. So can you talk about the legal infrastructure required in those different cases? Maybe we start with the classic software and then we talk a little bit more about, Web3, crypto, NFTs, and this industry sector that isn't brand new, but it's still pretty a lot of people wouldn't call it mature yet. So what are your thoughts on preparing for that?
Yeah, for sure. So software, there's not too many issues. Again, what I said before is making sure you own the software. If you have outside development done, that's super important. We're running into a lot of privacy concerns now with GDPR, and the big stick is 7% of your global revenues if you're not compliant and your services are targeted towards European citizens. So privacy is a huge thing. They're going to be looking at, okay, well, if you've built a bunch of code and you're selling data, well, if you haven't done any thought at all about privacy, that just shows, well, like, haven't you heard of privacy? Like, privacy is in the news once a month, right? So, privacy is a big thing with software now. Industry specific stuff will also come up with software. So, if you're doing healthcare software, there's additional privacy concerns and other things like that. Crypto is really interesting because if you're not thinking about these things, you can get into a lot of hot water. So,
Mhm.
um, there's rules around raising money, and we call these securities laws. And you can sort of fall under these laws accidentally. So some NFT projects would be considered securities, and would be subject to these regulations depending on the features. So if you think, yeah, we did a really good job, we like sold all these NFTs, and we said, in the future we're going to set up this new thing, and you get access to that new thing with the NFTs, and you'll make some money off the new thing because you're going to get shares of profit or this and that. Well, now you're actually under securities laws, and you sold securities to the public without the required disclosures. And now every investor
Mhm.
who's like, well, if I give you money now, you're going to have to fix this, and you're going to have to pay the lawyers all this money to kind of fix the mess, if it even can be fixed. So a lot of crypto runs into securities law, and the thing that sucks is like the most boring things don't fall under securities laws, but as soon as you kind of like want to get innovative, there's a good chance that might happen. And the other
Mhm.
thing as well is there's anti-money laundering regulations. If you're starting an exchange like a bank sort of light program, then there's a banking license, there's FinTrack. There's a lot of regulations involved with financial services. So crypto is one of those things where if you're just 18 out of high school, you want to start a crypto company. Most people don't have like just an idea of those things at all. Whereas like maybe with privacy and software, you've heard about it on the news, and Equifax, they have everyone's information and they get hacked. That's a big deal, but you don't really hear about too much, at least in Canada. Oh, this crypto firm didn't follow the regulations, and now they're fined for like 60 million. So the other thing
Mhm.
as well with all that is it's also a lot more expensive, because those are
Mhm.
very specialized lawyers who mostly work at the big firms as well. So it's very expensive to get formalized as a crypto company as well. But
Okay.
that's not to say investors won't give you money to build product in crypto, because that's what was happening a year or two ago. But it's more about you have to at least kind of be able to talk competently about, there's anti-money regulations, and we're going to make sure once the product built, we're going to do something about that. At least sort of know that there's stuff going on.
And also it's not there because there's so many buzzwords, right? Like in that realm of conversation that it's like, walk the talk is what I always try to say. Is like, if you're making a what statement, be ready to answer a how question. So kind of do your homework, make sure that you've talked to people who have been through it. Probably make sure that you've talked to some people who have failed at it too, and learn from them about what they didn't get right in the first time they tried it out. And so that kind of, we're in our last couple of questions here, so get ready, audience, if you want to start asking your own questions. Obviously the chat is available to throw any additional questions in. Um, but let's talk about building relationships, legal advisory relationships in the beginning. It's wise to have a friend like you. So talk about, um, how do you network in this kind of a direction, and how do you build relationships with a lawyer who's gonna cut the BS really? What are your recommendations for building those kinds of relationships in the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the easiest shortcut to kind of any trusted advisor relationship is talk to somebody that does what you do, and then ask them like, who's your lawyer, who's your accountant, who's your investment banker, things like that. Um, and if their business is successful, hopefully they've got someone good, and sometimes maybe they'll have a good lawyer but a bad accountant, or vice versa. So I think that's the easiest shortcut. That's the thing. Lawyers aren't very good at marketing, not getting out there. One, because they're just so busy. Um, but,
Hmm.
but two, it's a very sort of conservative business model. So um, again, I'm out here. I'm happy to chat with people for free and sort of at least give you that starting knowledge of sort of what you need. But yeah, I mean, there's a certain pricing level firms will get to, and a lot of the big firms and the mid-sized firms are at this price point where um, everybody sort of agreed, okay, this document kind of costs this much, and it's going to be a lot for early stage founders. So finding someone you can kind of trust is really good. And um, most firm models is if you're small, you're going to get the bare minimum, and you don't get that tailored intention until you get some really attractive traction. And at that point, you can afford whatever firm you want. So I don't know. I like small practitioners, but again, you don't know if they're any good or not, because like we said before,
Hmm.
we just don't have the skills outside of our expertise to determine if somebody's really good. So I guess the shortcut is ask people sort of with a similar business who their professionals are.
Right. Right. So I'm gonna ask my producers to throw on the I want to join the stage button in case there's anyone who wants to ask a question live with us next to the fire. Otherwise, feel free to get them ready and put them in the chat. But my last question kind of ties to the most recent one that we just chatted about. But you know, someone who's putting together a budget, in the early stage, pre-seed, during seed, everything like that, what should a founder expect to spend? How much should they actually kind of set aside for legal counsel or legal fees? What have you seen before, I guess, in terms of that first 3 to 5 years in a startup world?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, 3 to 5 years. Hopefully, you're making some money and you're not
Yeah.
pre-seed. But fair enough. I mean, early on, listen, if there's no money coming in, you have no investment. Investors aren't going to expect you to have those sort of things done. So, super, super early. Don't worry too much about it. If you raise 200 grand and some of that money, like you haven't paid for an hour of somebody's time just to talk to them, to just be like, okay, I'm doing this crypto thing. Like, just give me some goalposts, some red flags. So investors will be a little worried if you've raised some money and you haven't really spent it on professional services. So, I mean, I've heard a lot of firms, they'll do 5 grand for a shareholders agreement, 10 grand for a stock options plan. So if you really go with a more traditional firm, you might be looking at, I mean, some big firms will do 5 grand for kind of like a full package of like very basic
Mhm.
documents for a startup to get going. So on the low end, perhaps 5 grand. And again, that's not customized, and I don't know how comprehensive like the array of documents are there. And I've heard some companies spend 50 grand to sort of get fully formalized and everything set up there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, 5 to 50 grand is a pretty wide range, but if you don't have the hookup, if you don't have the good deal, you might be closer to 50 grand than five. And
Mhm.
you have to remember that the model with most of these firms is, I'm not making money when you're small. So I'm going to make money when you're big. So I'm going to give you the bare minimum just to get you going. Where me personally is, I love working with founders, and I'm happy to sort of help people early on. So I give those people that extra attention, and let's sit down for an hour or two to figure out what those roadblocks are, and maybe you can structure your business to get around certain things, or just tweak your NFT just like this, and okay, now we're not under securities laws. But yeah, like,
Mhm.
you might not be getting that advice unless you give them that 50 grand retainer. So your
It's kind
mileage.
of like it fits in the short-term pain, long-term gain model, right? Because if it stops you from running into trouble once you're 3 years deep in a venture that you're hitting a roadblock with, but having had those puzzle pieces in place beforehand made sense. Like, again, you gotta weigh what makes the most sense in the long-term vision too. So definitely, yeah, it's a wide range that you've given, but at the same time, depending on what it is that you're building, it makes a lot of sense to choose in, I'd say, getting more advice, getting a deeper dive, so to speak, and building a relationship with someone that you might be able to call with a question or text with a question, a few months down the road. You never really know. So
Mhm.
that brings us to the end of our formal questions. Again, thanks to everyone who stuck around. We are happy to answer audience questions. If there's anyone who wants to either join the stage, there should be an I want to join the stage button in the upper right area of your screen. Otherwise, drop them in the chat on the right area over here, and I can say them out loud to Daniel. We'll kind of chit chat here for a little bit, and then we'll also just kind of put us over to one-on-one networking, and you can connect with other folks in the audience if you're interested in sticking around. But I might as well kind of just give the thank you now, and say, please feel welcome to ask us questions, and if there's any topics that you would want to see covered on a future HustleStruggz, or maybe something that we could follow up with down the road. We'd love to hear if there's something else that you'd like us to cover that has to do with how Daniel can continue being such a rock star insider that gives amazing legal advice to some of the wonderful folks that are joining our community.
Happy to chat, guys. Let's get some questions.
Yeah. Okay. It seems like we've got a quiet bunch today. I'm going to check to see if there's anyone coming up the speaker queue. That's quite all right. So, I mean, if there's no questions, that's okay. You can always reach out to myself or Dan on the Insider Slack if that's somewhere that you hang out. I know that he and I are on there definitely, every day. If you have any questions about or ideas for a future HustleStruggz, I'd love to chat with you as well. You can reach me at laura@techtoronto.org or insiders@techtoronto.org. Appreciate you coming and hanging out with us during your lunchtime today, and we'll send it all over to Open Networking. So please feel free to stick around and connect with someone, or go about your day. We appreciate you taking a break with us. So, and thank you so much, Dan, for your participation. I think that was really, really awesome.
Thank you, Laura. A pleasure.